Hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the 12th Annual Homeland Security Symposium and Expo, co-hosted by Christopher Newport University's Center for American Studies, HII, Dominion Energy, and Drainpipe. And thank you also for braving the inclement weather. I know it was a challenge for many of you, so we appreciate your making the effort and traversing challenging roads. My name is Nathan Bush, and I'm co-director of the Center for American Studies. Now, the Center for American Studies is an academic program here at CMU that's dedicated to reinvigorating civic education by fostering teaching and research about America's founding principles, America's economic system, and national security. To this end, we support the university's major and minor in American Studies, which focuses on America's founding principles and America's founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, and the major and minor also focus on the evolution of America in light of these founding principles. We also, in the center, support the university's major in international affairs and its minor in national security studies. We're also in the process of designing and proposing a master's degree in national security here at CNU. And we've received the green light from the provost to develop a survey that would gauge interest in such an MA, both internally and externally. And so, I don't see the clicker. So if you could perhaps, Walt, if you could forward the slide to the next, slide. So we've included this survey. We have a copy of the survey at the front desk. We also have a QR code. If you wouldn't mind filling this out, either electronically or on paper, it would assist us as we move the proposal along through the accreditation process. Now, in support of the center's mission, we also host a suite of national security conferences, including this Homeland Security Symposium. This year, the symposium focuses on energy and infrastructure security, a topic of great and increasing importance for our nation's security. One of America's 16 critical infrastructures, our energy needs are dramatically increasing. But at the same time, our energy infrastructure is increasingly vulnerable. On his first day in office, US President Donald Trump issued an executive order declaring a national energy emergency, identifying the need for, as the executive order states, reliable, diversified, and affordable supply of energy to drive our nation's manufacturing, transportation, agriculture, and defense industries. And last week, US Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, called for steps to unleash a golden era of energy dominance, which included the need to strengthen energy grid reliability and security, certainly a topic that we'll be thinking about over the next 2 days. And yet, US energy suppliers, the grid itself, and various sectors that support and are supported by the energy sector are facing unprecedented threats. Increasingly burdened, our energy infrastructure is increasingly brittle and increasingly vulnerable. Vulnerable to cyber and other electronic attacks, as well as kinetic and other physical attacks. Emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence and unmanned systems can further increase these vulnerabilities. And make no mistake, our adversaries are increasingly targeting our critical infrastructures, including the energy sector. As President Trump emphasized in his executive order, in an effort to harm the American people, hostile state and non-state foreign actors have targeted our domestic energy infrastructure weaponized our reliance on foreign energy, and abused their ability to cause dramatic swings within international commodity markets. And so the purpose of this conference is to examine energy and infrastructure security, identifying potential vulnerabilities, but also helping us to envision a way forward, to maximize America's energy potential while simultaneously improving the resiliency of this critical infrastructure. All right. So over the next 2 days, we will be exploring this issue in detail. And we're very, very excited about the caliber of speakers who will be joining us. But first, let me thank some of our sponsors who have made this event possible, beginning with HII, Dominion Energy, and Drainpipe as the co-hosts of this symposium. Thank you also to the Hampton Roads chapter of HSS. I know it's pronounced many different ways. I'll pronounce it HSS today. And Infragard for helping to get the word out about this conference. Thanks also to the Sarah Scaife Foundation and the multitude of organizations who have supported this event. If you could, well, actually it's here. So if you'll see these organizations listed on the slide. Please visit their exhibits, their tables in the exhibit hall. Many of them have joined us to show us their products and services. Please also let me thank our esteemed Center Board of Advisors for assisting in planning of this event. And finally, a heartfelt thanks to our center's intrepid junior fellows, especially Dylan Frederick, Emily McKenna, and PJ Jones for the countless hours that they've put into making this event a success. Our talented junior fellows, by the way, many of them will be looking for internship opportunities, and I strongly recommend them all. Okay, with that said, let me turn things quickly over to John Magnum, the Corporate Director of Security and Emergency Management of HII.
Just briefly, I wanted to say welcome to everybody for attending. This is an amazing symposium. HII has been a partner since 2017 sponsoring this event. So there's always opportunity to welcome other sponsors to the table to help the center not only sponsor this, but other events. Speaking with the professor, he's got good plans for the future for expansion. These are the future of our industry that is coming in, so we've kind of owe it to them to feed into them and be able to provide some networking and mentor opportunities. So with that, I'm excited about the next few days. The panel and the agenda looks incredible. As a member of the Defense Industrial Base, the topic for this has a different type of bleed over for us, but in the world of security and emergency management, it's other ideas that come from other industry sectors that really strengthen our program. So with that, welcome. Look forward to talking with you over the next few days, and have a great session.
All right, so very quickly, we will be pivoting to the first panel session. And so just bear with us for just a couple minutes as the participants for panel one come onto the stage. Thank you.
Better. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to ask the panel to go through and introduce ourselves, but it's really cool about this getting out and meeting you all today. We've already had some really great conversations. A lot of the panels you've probably been to, kind of, death by PowerPoint or something like that. We're really not trying to focus on that, but we do want to give you kind of an overview of what we do, how we go about doing it, and we can go from there. So with that, I want to introduce a gentleman on my far end here, and just take a moment.
All right. Unfortunately, you got stuck with me today. I'm Troy Wheeler. I'm Physical Security Specialist for Rappahannock Electric Co-op. Of course, my background is in law enforcement, and we have a very small department at this time, hoping to grow it.
Austin Warnick. I lead our national security intelligence team at Flashpoint Intel. We are the largest private intelligence company currently after, let's see, who was it? So we have a team of about 10 analysts currently, and we are growing, and I've been with the company for about 5 years. Prior to that was Intel for the Navy for 8 years, Persian Farsi linguist, cross-trained into digital network intelligence. But yeah, very glad to have the opportunity to speak today. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Jeff Hoffman. I'm the president and CEO of a small tech startup called Cyber Intelligent Partners. Kind of a part-time gig, I would call it, a daytime job. I work for a group called the Lafayette Group, which primarily supports the vulnerability management branch within CISA at DHS. And then I'm also an instructor at New York University where I champion the Cyber Threat Intelligence Analysis course. And I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad all of you could make it here as well.
Thanks, Jeff. For those who don't know me, I know many of you in the audience already. My name is Doug King. I'm the Director of Cyber Infrastructure and the Information Security Officer at Rappahannock Electric Cooperative. And for those of you who aren't familiar with electric cooperatives, we are not-for-profit electric utilities. We serve about 56% of the landmass in the U.S. REC, which is Rappahannock, so actually Troy and I are actually colleagues. Troy heads up our physical security team. REC serves about 22 counties in Virginia. So for us, it was kind of a race to get here before the storm did. But I look forward to getting to know the panelists a little bit more and feel free to ask questions as we move along. I really want to have a truly organic conversation. So with that, I do have some questions that kind of frame what we're doing here today and just kind of get the conversation started. But gentlemen, I did want to ask you, with everything going on, I would say in the last three or so years, what do you see, how do you see the evolving threat landscape impacting critical infrastructure? And a lot of that has really changed, I think, over the last few years, particularly with everything that's happening in Ukraine and around the world. Our critical infrastructure is really under attack. And while we're all here is really about protecting the building blocks of civilization. And with that, I've seen some interesting things in my neck of the woods, and I'm sure Jeff and others have as well. So, Austin, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. I think two of the biggest emerging threats currently, that we're seeing when it comes to critical infrastructure would be supply chain compromise. So compromise of, equipment, network devices that are going to be incorporated into critical infrastructure, critical network infrastructure. But then in addition to that, what we're also seeing is, insider threat, but a new type of insider threat. So insider threat, not simply just, someone who's unhappy at the current company that they're at, but folks that are maliciously applying for jobs that are actually representing, foreign nation states that will, get this job in order to become an insider and then funnel the salary back to the state. So DPRK is definitely notorious for this, and it's one of the emerging threats that we're tracking currently.
Classically, I've always seen insider threats. You have two types, knowingly and unknowingly. Do you see the knowingly percentage increasing? Or is it, usually what I've seen, I've done some insider threat investigations, it's usually 98% unknowingly, people just making careless mistakes. And the other 2% are, threat actors. Do you see the more of the threat actors increasing, or they're still tracking the same numbers?
I'd say it might be increasing slightly.
How about you, Jeff? Insider threat?
Insider threat, I think that's where we have a greater need. I've always been an advocate. I was overseas for a while working U.S. European Command and helping them build up their cyber capabilities. And when I was asked, what can we do? What can we do to develop mitigation solutions, capacity? I said, look at left of boom. We need more cyber counterintelligence. But if you look at a place like Europe, you look at the US, I've got a good slide deck here. I could breeze through it for a minute if I'd be allowed a bit of time.
Sure.
So here we go. This is just, you'll get this slide deck. But I like to put this into perspective. This was my first US Senate meeting in 1997. It was the National Defense Panel that put out this report, where they began defining terms like cyber assault. They began developing plans and strategy for cyber posture, and looking at other strategy in areas where cyber capabilities could grow up until 2020. Joel, you're going to like this next slide. Flash forward. This is from the ODNI cyber threat assessments. 2018 and 19, I provided contributions to these, including the unclassified version of the 2019 cyber threat assessment. But most importantly, look at that graph on the left. 2007, 4 or 5 state cyber actors, up to close to over 40 by 2017. And the threat has never changed. It's only increased. And so to answer your question, you look at the bottom, increased capabilities, sophistication, use of tactics, TTP, a little military jargon there. And I'm glad to be back here. I was actually stationed at Langley at the Aerospace Command and Control Intelligence Surveillance Reconnaissance Center, which was the predecessor to the Global Cyberspace Center for the Air Force. So I have seen these capabilities, the increase in the capability, the use of new technologies to advance their operations, adversary operations, and cyber criminals, like artificial intelligence. Now you don't even need a person in the middle to run some of these operations. But also I believe the other threat, and like I mentioned with Insider, is we need to get a better handle on left of boom. But at this point, a lot of organizations have been compromised. So you're seeing a lot of resiliency planning, and that's important as well. But the insider threat, a lot of people forget, cyber just isn't zeros and ones. It might be a physical person who might have been recruited, say, by a country like Russia to plug in a thumb drive. And so we need to get a little more aggressive in cyberspace. And as you can see, from 1997 to almost 30 years later, not much has changed. There's a lot of stuff that we got written on paper. And I think we just need to get a little more active, more tabletop exercise activities so we can really practice out some of these threats, these real threats that we have. And then this is just a final slide. This is from November to April. I'm here with the Gold Institute as well. We just hosted a cyber summit this past January. And many of you probably know Daryl Hagley. He's with the Department of Air Force. He put up this slide. Just from November to April, these are all the activities, and I don't necessarily like to call them attacks, maybe pre-positioning of cyber embedded in our critical infrastructure, organizations, and facilities.
And one of the things...
That's it for the slides.
And one of the things I've noticed is, I'm getting a little older, and if you would have asked me 10 years ago, what is cyber? And I would say, what is information security? What is cybersecurity? I would say, really, it was a technical challenge. But the older I get, more wisdom I accumulate through bad experiences, it's really about people. And Troy, you're talking about insider threats just for a moment here. I know you work on the physical security side of things. Can you kind of go into what you've been seeing here the last few years and how some of the physical assaults are either organized crime or unorganized crime or any other suspicious things you've
Of
seen
course, as far
at our
as
substations?
Insider, we're looking at doing screenings inside our buildings, of course, just scanning these things per quarter. As far as the infrastructure goes, we've had some larger hits. Of course, one of our biggest ones, we had individuals hit a transformer. That's $500,000, okay? So this is one individual going for copper and destroying a $500,000 transformer.
And what's the lead time on a transformer like that? I've heard it's measured in
2 years.
2 years.
So to recover that, it's huge. And that's what the transformer costs. That doesn't count for the cleanup of the oil spills and the work that had to be done to replace it. So the only thing I can say with that is working with Virginia State Police and DHS and other groups like that, we are very good about getting intel. Situations like this was a lone wolf situation, so you're not going to get that information. This person had criminal history, but this was all personal gain for him. So with that said, the best thing I can tell you is always to build your partnerships before, like you said, left of the boom. You have to get that ahead of time. We had a great partnership with the state police, and sometimes you might already heard of a tower dump. This was a Google search, and we were able to identify this individual with nothing. Basically, we worked with the state police, did a geo mapping, and was able to obtain information on that subject.
So this is where you subpoena Google, and they provide basically smartphone data.
Smartphone data, and we were able to tie a couple phone calls or phones that were operating in that area, and we were able to tie the one to the next day of that to a scrapyard.
Right.
So we were able to show that individual went to a scrapyard with, guess what, copper. So that's how we were able to identify that person.
So one of the things, I don't know if the audience has seen it, but the amount of reporting that we see through the ISACs about suspicious activity, I would say over the last 3 years, either we're reporting more and seeing more, or there's actually truly is more activity. A lot of drone activity, a lot of suspicious people, individuals pulling up to substations, critical infrastructure, taking a lot of photos.
Surprisingly enough, a lot more in the daytime. We've seen more.
Yeah, they're very
increases.
bold.
Getting bolder, like you said, out there. Used to be after 12 o'clock, that's when you would think stuff would happen. We just had a situation beside our facility last week, and they were going through another facility beside us, going for their scrap. And so we had 6 officers show up for that. So these individuals are getting very bold, and it's not a nighttime deal anymore.
Yeah, and the thing about it too is whether they're there for nation state or some type of espionage or some type of tampering and saboteur, the impact is really the same. You're talking about critical infrastructure being damaged or destroyed or brought offline. It can have really significant impacts. Now, one of the things I wanted to talk about are many organizations. So the nation's electric cooperatives, which I represent here today along with Troy, we are not-for-profit utilities. And one of the things I've seen increasingly is that a lot of organizations, we do not have infinite number of people. We do not have an infinite budget. So are there any thoughts, and I'm asking the entire panel, are there any thoughts on how do you balance your investments in reliability, particularly around operational reliability, particularly with your cybersecurity investments? And I know that ideally we could all get risk to zero, but honestly, no, I don't think any organization can truly afford that. So if you have a moment, can we talk about how do you balance that, and how do you inform your leadership about what guardrails you want to be between at all times when it comes to the proper investments?
You want to take that one, Joe?
Sure. I will say that my company isn't that robust, so I won't speak from my company perspective. I'm more of a SOC for services, CISO for services type organization, but I will speak for where I work at CISA in the private sector, looking at vulnerability assessments. And that is one tool that SLTT critical infrastructure organizations have available to them. One example would be the cybersecurity performance goals. So you can do a self-intake assessment. An organization can do a self-intake assessment. But then the next step is, what do you do with that? It'll identify maybe a stoplight chart for you to show where you may have gaps, vulnerabilities. But the other big thing that I think organizations really need to emphasize in their budgets, and when you're putting together a risk management plan, you're starting to see the CISO career field increase. Or maybe empower the SOC manager a little more to be able to be in a more of a management position. And that really has impacts on information sharing as well, and building those relationships across public and private sector.
One of the things I've seen, particularly around this, is I think with any organization, is that you want to make sure your leadership has all the attributes of an organization, has a firm grasp of the risks that are at hand, either from an operational standpoint or strictly from a purely information security or cybersecurity impact. And that's one of the things we work really hard with the cooperatives to focus on, is making sure their boards have the information they need they can talk about it from an enterprise risk standpoint. One of my questions I always ask a team when I meet a new cooperative or we work with a new team is really about, how many people in the room are under risk management, right? And I think if I asked everyone in this room that, I think you all would raise your hand. And I think one of the things we understand now is that everything is kind of interconnected. We kind of learned that during COVID, and to say that none of us are in this enterprise risk management field is, kind of folly these days. And this is kind of a broad question for the entire panel, whether it's also and physical as well. What are some of the biggest cyber hygiene failures that within critical infrastructure that you've either seen or you still see organizations struggle with? And I can answer that starting off. I'll kick it off. But one of the things organizations are really great at is they kind of know what they look like from the inside out, right? But they really lose that perspective from the outside in. And I've seen organizations really put a lot of emphasis and a lot of responsibility when it comes to cybersecurity on their IT teams. And while that's classically how it's done, it's really not built for success, because when you put that amount of responsibility in a single team, over time they tend to bend towards operational success and not necessarily security success. So with that, I've seen some things, and I'm sure you've seen some things, Austin.
Yeah, absolutely. It goes from the really simple stuff, right? Like, as you kind of alluded to, organizations not looking at the outside and focused on the inside. So example of that would be, having some kind of remote access port open to the external internet, right? Someone being able to just simply RDP via password spraying into the network. That's a huge, just simple one.
Right.
Specifically when it comes to critical infrastructure, right? We've seen, script kiddies be able to just, scan up a whole net block for VNC, because VNC is a common port that you'll see programmable logic controllers accessed via, right? And so, they'll scan up a whole net block of public IP addresses looking for open, VNC open to the internet. And, as soon as they see that, they'll password spray it with like the 5 most common passwords.
And just to be clear, VNC is a remote administration tool. It's meant to be used inside of networks, not from the internet, really.
We're seeing, we still see that exposed every now and then, and we do see cyber actors exploit that on a somewhat frequent basis, especially when it comes to like these, cyber criminal and hacktivist groups that are primarily made up of script kiddie type actors, right? They aren't very advanced, but in order to just show a quick, easy win and try to gain notoriety and build their own reputation, they will go after these low-level attacks to show like, hey, I got access to this programmable logic controller and I can turn the lights off at this hospital.
Where do you think the ball's being dropped when you see those external durability, failures?
It is, not using tools that are like, Shodan, the global internet scanners to passively scan your network, right? Yeah. Using things like DNS dumpster to identify, what nodes that you have that are even exposed, and then, running those through something like Shodan to be able to show like, all right, this is what we have that's publicly visible, and these are the ports that are open, and these are the vulnerabilities associated with those applications running on those nodes. Another one, right? Another one too is, from a vulnerability perspective, right? Huge gap is just, CVEs. Like the NVD has not caught up with the vulnerabilities that are being sent to them to get issued as CVEs, right? And so you do have naturally just a really large backlog of things that haven't made it into the National Vulnerability Database yet. Whether they even will at this point is a question, right? Mm-hmm. And then in addition to that, right, it's not just the stuff that's not making it into the CVE serialization process. It's also the vulnerabilities that are on the obscure security researcher blogs and forums where, they've identified and wrote up a blog post about a really critical security flaw. They may have, tipped the organization to it as part of a bug bounty program, but, that may not ever make it into the NVD, right? That might not ever get picked up. So there's, there is a gap in between like what known vulnerabilities there are and the unknown vulnerabilities that are still out there. They're just more obscure.
And once the exploit makes it on the GitHub,
Yeah.
it's kind of game over at that point.
Absolutely.
So,
Yes.
So Jeff, I know you had a little bit of experience on this as well. You're talking about vulnerability management a little bit earlier. Do you have a take on this?
Yeah, I agree with all the thoughts that you just mentioned, Austin. Just adding a little bit more from the experience of advising in Europe in dealing with other countries, but also seeing the same issues with U.S. organizations, is the inventory or the asset management or lack thereof.
That's foundational to every
Yeah.
information security and
Right.
cyber programs, asset inventory. You can't defend what you don't know that you have.
Exactly.
Right.
So I definitely would add that. I mean, we literally been in country in Europe and around a table identifying critical infrastructure, and a week later finding it ending up in their policy and strategy. So with the risk management plan, inventory, and having a firm understanding of what you need to protect, that is number one. And that's why I really do like the CPGs, the cybersecurity performance goals that were designed and authored by CISA. They really do provide a good baseline for an organization.
And one of the things I've seen, I've run incident response, I think on 5 continents now, either in person or remotely. It's really not the sexy things that you might hear on the evening news. Usually it's based on when you see an incident or you see something unfold. Usually it's an overburdened IT team and a really under-resourced security team. They lose track of kind of the blocking and the tackling that you need to do on a daily basis. Yeah, you don't get fanfare for patching your systems. You don't get fanfare for shutting off those services and closing it down. But usually when you see these really impactful, I guess events, usually it's simple things like Active Directory that everyone but no one seems to have responsibility for, patch management, what everyone seems to have responsibility for, but maybe no one's really doing it. And where it gets dangerous is when you put those security responsibilities on an IT team who's charged with keeping things online. And they're not necessarily thinking about the kind of holistic impact of patch management.
If I could just add one
Sure.
more point.
Go for it.
For CEOs, managers, especially CEOs who have a CISO, emphasizing that you may have to take risk. You may have to invest in more automation. That could actually, you mentioned, the overburden of personnel, say in a SOC. There are tools out there now, especially with CTI, cyber threat intelligence and information sharing. So don't be afraid to put those proposals forward, to your leadership, your CEOs, and say, hey, we could save 20% in labor by automating some of these playbooks and incident response capabilities.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that people kind of lose sight of when you're putting together your business case. It's not just about the tooling, but it's about the people too. And if you can show an ROI of getting the right tooling,
Right.
at least from a repeatability standpoint. So maybe you don't have to hire the 24/7 for patch management. Maybe you can do 8x5. But if you have the right tooling, you can pull off the 8x5 team. So great point. Yeah.
To add to that, very small, one of the things is communication. We're two different things, IT and physical security. You're talking about inside out. As physical security goes, I'm always looking from the outside in, trying to see how someone can get in. One of the things is, the thumb drive, something as simple as the thumb drive being dropped in the parking lot.
Still an issue, I heard.
Yes. So what we try to do is keep a very sterile environment so we know we do that patrol. When's the last time your physical security has been up on top of the roof of your building? Okay, we've talked about this before. Drones now, people can, and we've seen a drone, someone getting ready to operate a drone right there in their facility. And I was able to stop and talk to him. Was he just having fun with a drone? Or do you stop there? Do you send him away? Or do you do an investigation and follow up? What's this guy's past? I mean, was he trying to drop a pineapple on top of the building and get information? So, and that's where the communication comes in from IT to physical security. Make sure we're sharing that information and looking at different ways. IT gets looking at a lot of things just like physical security looks like this way, y'all are looking this way, but let's get together and let them meet in the middle.
Perfect. So moving on to cyber intelligence. And this is something that's, I think, critical for all organizations is, I think the days of getting information, months after the fact, and it makes for a good story, but, really looking more towards proactively receiving threat intelligence that your organization can ingest and your organization can put into motion really, really quickly. And I know Austin folks at Flashpoint have a really good reputation when it comes to this. What does that integration look like these days, especially over the last few years? I know things are evolving rapidly, particularly around critical infrastructure, but how has it improved? That proactive defense, how has it improved? How is it impacting utilities and other critical infrastructure?
Sure. At Flashpoint, we do a lot of the open source and deep and dark web collection, right? And so when it comes to, outside looking in, it is, the illicit online communities that are, discussing how to carry out certain attacks. It is initial access brokers that are offering, access into
And
organizations.
this is really about understanding what an adversary sees,
Right.
and making yourself as unattractive as possible. Make your posture, make your attack surface look very boring yet durable. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that is correct. And I mean, there's obfuscation through, hiding things, but there's also obfuscation through, other means like disinformation, right? Like not necessarily
Right.
doing it in a malicious way, but,
Right.
Maybe seeding some honeypots out there and,
Right.
and stuff like that. But from our perspective, there's just the amount of places to look for threats
Right.
isn't, shrinking. It's only grown. We started off as a deep and dark web company, focused on, .onion sites, right, where ransomware blogs were, where, these illicit online marketplaces were, where data, illicit items were being trafficked. But it's only increased to other spaces, right? So like Telegram is probably the number one, illicit online platform currently, even with, the company becoming, more amendable to, working with law enforcement and things like that. We have seen some threat actors pivoting towards like Signal and things like that. But for the most part, right, there's just so many places to look that you really need to, you need to put on that mindset of the threat actor, right? What does that threat actor mindset look like? Well, what would a threat actor have access to? They would have access to these same illicit online communities where things like, info stealer malware logs might be being sold, where your credential organization's credentials might be being sold, where identity information might be being sold, right? And then you take that information and combine it with just, some surface social media footprinting, right? And, you've got a really nice cake to start a really, robust social media, social engineering campaign, right? When it comes to social engineering, right, like the tactics and techniques and procedures, like, are only evolving, are only getting stronger. We alluded to it earlier. The human factor is the, number one vulnerability in any organization. It absolutely holds true. These cyber actors, they're leveraging, your exposed credentials. They're leveraging, information discovered on social media. Then they can, combine
LinkedIn,
that.
I'm sure LinkedIn.
Yeah, and then now they can take your, LinkedIn profile picture and use some deep fake AI to make that look like a video. And
So one of the
All
things
that.
we've seen at our cooperative over the last 3 years, prior to 21, I guess 22, our leadership was targeted. Number one, payroll, HR, all the places where you can get your hands on dollars, so to speak. What we see now is more of our distribution design team, our engineers, our IT staff, anyone who has a title or a role that really lends itself to operational success. Are you seeing that as well, Austin? Are you seeing kind of the flip-flop where the ones that were less targeted now become the more targeted?
yeah, in a sense. So yes,
Okay.
I can say yeah.
Yeah.
to that.
So Troy, we talked about physical security a little bit, and I wanted to touch on, intelligence that you might be, where do organizations go to get the best or the most realistic, the most actionable intelligence around physical security?
I'm not looking statewide. I'm usually looking local, more that's affecting us. But of course, the Virginia State Police Fusion Center is a great one. And of course, I have partners with the DHS and FBI. You got to make those partners and actually have meetings. Right here in Virginia, there's a group called Virginia Crime Clinic. So that's a good group to go to. That's both law enforcement and private sector. So they go to those meetings and share that information. We have a quad group up there out in Blue Ridge area, and that's pretty much about 15 organizations, local organizations through there that a lot of analysts go to and share information. We also have right here with the co-ops, we try to have meetings and calls that we share information because we're sharing their bad guys, okay? That's the main thing, is we share the same bad guys. So if we're seeing an uptick in copper theft or different things like that, they're going to share it with us.
Right. And Jeff, from your side of the fence, we're talking about threat intelligence and what does it mean? What is your take on it? I know some of your slides touched on it. You got some, information here, but what are you seeing?
For CTI, I would say the greatest improvement has been the transparency and organizations more willing to share bad information. We don't want big government, but when you look at it from a federal government perspective, there has been more guides put out for organizations. For instance, Department of Energy put out a cybersecurity baseline report last year. So that really helps at least organizations understand, what those vulnerabilities might be and how they can integrate them into their own
So kind of learning from other people's mistakes before
Exactly.
you have your own, right?
And I would highly encourage, you mentioned DHS, the regional rep within your area, really get to know that regional rep at CISA. And you mentioned local police, any kind of information sharing group, that you can become a part of. And the other big thing for federal government that I think you've seen improvement is the declassification of a lot of the adversary information.
So the information is more readily available and you're getting it sooner?
Exactly.
All right.
And you mentioned Austin OSINT or open source. A group like Dragos for critical infrastructure and becoming knowledgeable on all the actors that they are identifying, including
So
Volt
when they do
site.
a breakdown of like the TTPs that you're likely to see?
Yeah.
Yep.
And let's give kudos to MITRE, an enhanced version of MITRE ATT&CK for AI. I think it's called MITRE Atlas. So that's a new framework that can be included as part of your overall operational management plan within an organization.
One of the things I've done with my team, I lead a team of about 13 or 14 folks now, is that one of the things we do is we talk about disinformation and counterinformation. We seed things like social media. We create employees that do not exist. We create titles that do not exist, and we get a lot of phishing attempts, whether they're strictly email or voicemail. We'll plant telephone numbers, and we'll generate we'll do the deep fake AI and generated voice or generated face, and we'll put them out there, and we'll kind of sit back and collect and our own threat intelligence, and we share it with the other cooperatives as well. So there's a lot of very inexpensive ways that you can actually get a good handle on what's taking place. Let's go to the next question. Here's something I always say to my team is we always want to learn from others before we, other organizations' mistakes and turn a negative into a positive. So what can critical infrastructure providers such as the utilities represented here today and others learn from recent attacks on energy, water, and transportation systems? One of the things I'm seeing is really the basic blocking and tackling that saves the day. And I said it earlier, again and again, it's the simple things that win and gives your organization time to pivot and push those threat actors out. What have you seen, Austin? I know you have some war stories. We were talking about some things earlier. Is it really kind of the unique, sexy things that we hear about on television and the movies, or is it more of kind of the daily, they forgot to lock the door this time?
Sure. It is a combination of both. Like there are so many unknown factors, right? I alluded to earlier, just so many vulnerabilities out there that, are never going to be serialized into something official that you'd be able to use it on mass scale, right? But then in addition to that, right, there's so much information out there with regards to every single organization and every person at that organization at this point, that, again, one of the most common initial access vectors that we see is social engineering.
Is that based on stolen information? When my daughter was 11, she got a letter
Sure.
notifying that she was part of a data breach.
Right.
So what you're saying is that they're going to recycle that information
They can
eventually?
recycle that information to create a shadow persona, if you will, of a real individual, in order to pass off as this particular person.
Mm-hmm.
They could, if they have credentials for that individual, they could, attempt to log into email. If they have their person's email, it's their official business email. It's called BEC, Business Email Compromise. But once you have that, right, now I can send emails to other people in this person's contact list. And maybe there's malicious attachments included in there, right? Another way in which we see organizations get compromised at scale is via third-party downloads. So like sites that are hosting third-party software that you could download. A lot of this software has been cracked. It's been Trojanized with InfoStealer malware, which happy to talk about
Sure.
that if you like. Sure. But InfoStealer malware is definitely one of the bigger threats when it comes to organizations, from all industries at this point, right? From an initial access perspective, it is sort of like the golden goose, if you will. It's not just credentials. It's not just compromised credentials. It is a log of everything of value on that host that's been compromised. So it's going to include not just like the compromised credentials that were stored in the browser cache, but it's also going to include the autofill data, which is really PII.
So out of your browser, when your
Correct.
browser automatically fills in your
Yep.
credit card number or your
Yep.
passwords or your
Yep.
contact information?
All of that.
Okay.
But then in addition to that, the cookies, the software, the machine information, down to like GPU, CPU, screen resolution, operating system, all of the information that someone can then take and load into what's called an anti-detect browser, create a browser profile off of this information, and then they can not just, they may not even have to enter the credentials to log in. They have the cookies in the browser session.
So they're
that's
really
been cloned.
masquerading
They
your,
can just
your
be,
environment.
Correct. They can just be logged in, right?
All right.
They can just be logged in at this point. So that is one that we are seeing, increasingly being used as an initial access vector.
Is it more automated these days, or is it still more of a manual process as far as that tool?
It depends. It depends on the cyber threat group. But when it comes to like the compromise by InfoStealer malware, that is more or less automatic, right?
So with a remote workforce, people working from home, people working more remotely than ever, the network has extended to their home networks.
Correct.
It's extended to the hotels that many of us are staying in right now, et cetera.
Correct. Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to throw out scary numbers or anything like that, but we are like sitting on to the tune of 250 million of these InfoStealer malware logs. Each of those represents an individual infected host machine somewhere in the world that's been compromised.
So 250 million.
250 million is what we have currently, and that number is going to be growing. It's a big number, right? It's not just an insignificant number of machines out there. It's a lot. It's a big sliver of the portion of machines that even exist.
And do you find that these compromises are taking place because really the basics weren't being taken care of on those
Correct.
endpoints?
Yes.
So it's someone that didn't get EDR, someone didn't
Right.
get a definition update, someone didn't get a patch.
Yeah. And maybe they're working remote, right? Maybe they're working remote and they're coming off of, maybe they have their own personal laptop. The company didn't issue them a laptop and there's no mechanism to prevent a download from a third-party site or going to a specific malicious site. But maybe that employee is able to use that same laptop to log in to the corporate VPN, right? That's a huge security risk. And we definitely recommend not
So,
doing that.
so Troy, on the physical side, again, what can we learn from some of those recent attacks on energy, water, and transportation? I know there's been a few in the last couple of years. that were or were not labeled as domestic terrorism and others, but what are some of the stories that you've seen or what you witnessed firsthand, and what can we take from that and learn from?
Well, like everything else, most of the time we've seen the same attacks, from using the rifles, Metcalf in North Carolina. You're going to see the same attacks even locally with just if they're doing vandalism or theft. It's cutting the fence, how they approach it. So if we don't do anything with that, if we don't upgrade, make a stronger vandal-proof fence, if we don't put motion sensors out, so when they come in, cameras are basically reactive. They're going to catch that ricochet off that fence or possibly an image of a person.
So when the round ricochets off and there's a flash, that's when the camera sees what's
That's
going
when
on?
the camera sees it. They're not focused out and out, they're focused on the perimeter.
But that's a reactive measure.
Reactive. So what we want to do is try to do, if that's our issue with shooting, then we need to build taller fences, more, vandal-proof fences,
Right.
and things like that, bigger and better patrols.
Right.
So if you get an attack or a theft or something, and you just fix that, it's going to happen again. It's going to happen somewhere else. So you're just going to have to learn, like you said, learn from that and start adding. I always try to, whether it's our asset, one of the substations, which we have over 100, and I have like 6 or 7 facilities. Each year, I'm trying to add something more to our security, whether it's bollards, whether it's security film on the windows, more cameras, lighting, access control.
Can you talk about the lighting? Because we had a conversation earlier. I didn't realize you were doing this, but talk about lighting, and it's something that seems like it's such a basic principle, right? Can you talk about some of the deterrents that we were talking about earlier, that you have lights now that can make people nauseous?
Yeah, so this I learned 20 years ago. I'm a Virginia crime prevention. I'm a certified specialist in law enforcement, and about 20 years ago, we were down here actually in Norfolk area, and a couple things that for a business, they were playing music that to keep certain people away. One of the things was a low sodium type of lighting that would make you, when you're talking, the person looks yellow, greenish looking, and it actually just kind of makes you, and you want to get away from that. So
So
moves
it's like a
people
nudge
away.
out the door?
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
like we don't want
along
you
with
to
the
just,
music?
just move on out of
That's
here.
all.
Now at the substations, of course, I'm using a little bit more brighter lights. And
Right.
when we have a substation out in the country, you got houses around it. You don't want lights on all the time.
Sure.
So you want the motion sensor
Right.
lights to light up.
That's fascinating. So, Jeff, did you have anything you want to add to that, or?
Yeah, just briefly, blended with CTI. If you're a U.S. organization, also have an understanding of the adversary and what is the possible. I mentioned EUCOM. The EUCOM work actually included work with the Levant as well in Iranian capabilities, cyber capabilities, including some of their proxy. And I showed you that chart from Daryl Hagley. That was Cyber Avengers. So we're looking at China. We're looking at Volt Typhoon. But you have to also not forget about these other cyber actors that are actually getting into the wastewater treatment plant controllers in Israel, and incorporate that into your lessons learned, and to also develop your resiliency and mitigation
So that
plans.
sounds like a lot of it is baselining what normal is, and if there's a deviation from normal, be ready to initiate some type of
Exactly.
incident response. Okay.
And be ready for the worst. Iran is a bad actor, and we're not seeing the worst of it here versus what Israel might be seeing, especially through proxies like a Hezbollah.
Right. So,
And then also keeping in mind,
no, go for it.
lessons learned, Russia and Ukraine, looking at that hybrid warfare environment where they're using, and there's a lot of open source reporting that you can use and incorporate into your lessons learned.
So one of the things I have or I guess we're mixed bag, but kind of blessed and not blessed with, when I recruit members for my team, I tell them, like, if you really want a rewarding career in cybersecurity, there's nothing better than defending civilization. We've seen over the last few years that it really doesn't always go as planned. We had Colonial Pipeline, which, as you know, was very impactful for several days. I sent a kind of a clear shot across the bow. I know Russia and the administration at the time really, at least officially, they worked very closely with each other. We saw SolarWinds, supply chain compromise, but we also saw the older attacks on Ukraine's power grid. And Jeff, you just kind of teed it up for us. Have we learned the lessons of those attacks, and what were those lessons? I mean, have we truly internalized what happened there, and are we really better than where we were, even like or pre and post Colonial Pipeline as critical infrastructure?
What I could say to that is we've responded better with attribution and faster, a faster timeline of attributing an actual cyber actor. Where we fail, this is just my opinion, of course, is we always sanction. And this actually came up in the Cyber Summit in January that the Gold Institute had put together, which was actually co-founded by General Mike Flynn. And the question was, we also had the McCrary Institute, which is the foundations of the Solarium Commission. And one of the findings and recommendations was looking at, we've had red lines on paper, but when you start looking at the Typhoon APT series, and maybe some of the Iranian activities increasing because they have greater political will, we need better response. And we actually talked about what would a kinetic, non-lethal response look like to one of these cyber actors if they crossed the red lines that are written on paper. But our response is usually just a sanction, slap of some money restrictions without real impacts and or deterrence. And so I hope that this administration, I have a feeling that this administration will want to be much more aggressive in establishing those red lines. A lot of people don't like to use the word red lines, but also enforcing. And that's the major point, is enforcing those red lines and making sure that an actor like Iran or China understand that if you do use these cyber tools against our critical infrastructure, there will be a response, and it will be swift.
Hopefully, by that time, we can all agree, if we can all pull from the same APT lexicon and all agree what that APT should be called. I know there's different vendors out there, or different providers that basically call the same APTs,
Right.
but several different names. But I'll take that. We'll start there, but I agree with a lot of that. There needs to be consequences for a lot of these activities.
Yeah, if I could add, with Russia, you can map espionage to espionage. But when you're looking at Iran and you're looking at China pre-positioning for possible attack, then we actually need to look at what does sabotage look like in China.
And Austin, talking about solar winds, supply chain, Ukraine, post-Colonial Pipeline, I remember back during COVID, a lot of the hospitals were being ransomed. At my former organization, I got called into some of those. I remember talking with an IT director there. And I'll never forget what he said that day. He said, they are moving faster than we can respond. And with that, what have you seen with, what lessons have we learned post-Colonial Pipeline, solar winds, et cetera?
So from a deterrent perspective, I think we are doing some things now which are a little bit juicier than sanctions, right? Like there have been, some major takedowns and arrests recently, specific to some of these ransomware groups that have, inhibited their abilities to operate. Lockbit remains to be, still the most active and most prolific ransomware group that we're looking at currently. From a lessons learned perspective, though, I think, absolutely, like having those deterrents, drawing the red lines, right, defining what the red line is, those are huge. They definitely do go a long way. We can, we can make it a little bit more difficult on ourselves sometimes, though, from an intel perspective, when we do have, particular sanctions in place, like Iran, for example, right? Like from an intelligence perspective, it is difficult. It's a challenge, to get information out of these people sometimes. If we're looking at it from a human perspective, right? We can't actually exchange money with any of these people. So there are some, things out there that, are supposedly deterrents that actually can log jam us a little bit.
So one of the things I wanted to touch on before we do the next question, but Troy, we talked about how brittle, I think that's the term that was used, how brittle our critical infrastructure is. From a physical standpoint, from a physical security standpoint, can you kind of touch on just how little it could take. I know you hit it a little bit earlier about the transformer, but it really doesn't take much at all.
We actually have a location.
And it may be actually easier if you get stateside and you get a drone with a slinky. That's my joke of the day. But you get a drone with a slinky, you drape it across inside of a substation.
Yeah.
What's your total investment? $200?
Oh, yeah. That's an easy one. Actually, sometimes it might not even be a terrorist threat. We have some facilities that right alongside our highway. You got to be thinking, in one jurisdiction we have, I noticed that it was 3 accidents within a month's time, and one came very close to hitting our fence. So you have to think outside the box as well. It's not only protecting it, like I said, that's why you're doing outside in. It's not only protecting it from a bad actor, but also incidents like that. So what can you come up with? Possibly a ditch, a berm, or maybe even cinder, the big blocks you see sometimes, those barriers.
So low cost, relatively
Low cost, $100.
Low sophistication.
Yep. So, turn them around. And something I learned in crime prevention a long time ago, you can treat people most like cattle. Have you ever took your kid out there trick-or-treating? And if they go to a place and there's the door right here, that close, but if they have a nice lawn and a little hedge and everything, your kid will not even dare jump over that hedge to go to that door. If I got to go all the way to you to make a left and another left, they'll do it. So you pretty much have to look at your site and fix it up for that. But you always constantly look and just drive up to a site and look at it. Think of what can I do to basically break in, destroy it. And in a lot of cases, like you said, it's not that hard. So we're always thinking of new ways to protect it.
You got something to add, Dawson? Go for it.
Yeah, so, from Troy's perspective here, right? I think advanced persistent threat groups, right? Well, what does that really mean, right? It typically, the definition of that is, a cyber threat group that has the sophistication and resources of a nation state behind it, right? So when you are doing, preparing to defend your network, right? You should have that in mind, that there are entities with, state level resources and backing that could be going after your organization's network because you represent critical infrastructure in the United States, right? All of it is, a national security, target, for an adversary, right? So, I think the best thing that an organization can do to defend against itself from these types of attacks is having a tried and true red team, right? Starting at the physical level and going all the way up, working your way all the way up to the cyber threat intel landscape, right?
So you're talking about having your own internally embedded offensive team emulating an adversary before the adversaries show up.
Correct. But, potentially hiring that out to an impartial third party as well could be useful.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry. One other thing I want to say. Again, utilize your partners. Most of you are just like us. You don't have the manpower to be at those stations all the time. I just told you we have over 100 substations. I have done, I think, a very great job of working with my local law enforcement partners. Orange County one year visited the sites in their county alone over 400 times, okay? So we've gone out and did training, and we've sat down and talked about it, because an average officer's not thinking of that substation except, somewhere he might park, do a report. But that's great, let them do that report there. But explain to them, once you get there and talk to them and say, this is how important it is. There are 16 critical infrastructures, but what runs it all? Electric. So I tell them this, and now we're starting to listen. We're actually in some of their training now. Spotsylvania County has us on DPM or the power right there. So they have to do that as a part of their training, is go through a part of the electric grid and learn about it. And now we are starting to see a lot more visits to those sites. So eyes on.
So two things I want to touch on. The big thing I've seen, and we're going to talk about playbooks in just for a second, but one of the things I've seen, almost every organization does some type of regular cadence on, kind of a commodity penetration test or some type of red team engagement. And, in the past, it's always been about, testing the technology. But I think really the maximum value you get when you do those types of engagements is really about testing the response of your team members, right? Testing the response of your security team, test the response of your IT team, but also your leadership. and maybe that's part of your playbooks. And one of the things I've seen, and I'm throwing this over to Jeff, but those incident response playbooks, I mean, you might have a couple dozen, you might have more, right? But you're always adding to them. You're trying to keep them relevant. I can say that when most of the time, it really comes down to those tabletops exercises and making sure all your role players are really really comfortable running those playbooks, and they don't get the adrenaline. The adrenaline doesn't distract them, doesn't confuse them. The fog of war, as they say. Jeff, have you been seeing the playbooks that we've been talking about for, I guess, probably 15 years now, maybe longer? Have you been seeing those come through perfectly and save the day, or do you really see it as kind of like baseline? Like I say, I use this analogy before: blocking and tackling. This is how you start it.
I would say no. And proof of that is the backlog, at least in the SLTT community, for assessments, and and that's why where my day job is, we're trying to increase assessments as a service, especially something like external penetration testing, and standardizing that. But that's my number one mitigation for 2025 and beyond, is to engage in more tabletop exercise activities. And again, I'll foot stomp CISA. They have tabletop exercise packages that can be leveraged for organizations. But even bigger than that, having done the international capacity building, I've proposed, I think some of you may have seen the Neptune Shield booth that's in the other room. But as a follow-on to the summit that we hosted in January, we actually want to do more of a statewide level tabletop exercise. And I think we need to model what we do for countries at the state level, starting with the CIO. Starting with the Secretary of State when you're looking at, say, election security, which is still on the critical infrastructure list, even though some of us want to go to paper and one day of voting. That's just my political humor right there. But tabletop exercises in getting these things off the shelf, getting them off the paper,
And really
and
uncomfortable.
practicing.
And really uncomfortable tabletop exercises.
And one example,
Right.
Romania, when we were advising there, the question was, okay, if your port gets hit, electrical grid, who's responsible? And everybody looked at each other kind of like a scarecrow.
These guys.
Yeah, in terms of hiring personnel for their cyber command, they're in a peacetime environment. But ransomware that disrupts electrical grid for 2 weeks, that's a conflict, but it's not wartime. And so that gives you kind of a good gray area to look at. And at the state level, I don't know that we've necessarily done a good job of that. You can see that through strategy, trying to push it back to the private sector. So I think we just need more emphasis on practicing the worst. That way we know how to respond instead of always being reactive. And I flashed that 97 National Defense Panel report. I started this back in 1997. And I have not seen, that type of tabletop. There are tabletop exercises. There are other models. You can look at the nuclear WMD community. They do a really good job of tabletop exercising. We need to build a model and a version of that for cyber and digital transformation and all the other attack areas that are increasing, like the Internet of Things.
Sounds like it's fair to say a good tabletop exercise, you should never walk out feeling like you nailed it.
Exactly. Yeah. You want to push the boundaries so you don't know what the answer is. And if you do know what the answer is, that's good. Yeah. But in your scenario, are you using an Iranian logic controller attack?
Yeah, you should.
Not espionage.
You should have homework when you leave a TTX.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, I was actually going to hand it over to you. I mean, the physical side of things. I know you run playbooks and preparedness all the time. Maybe Austin, your teams support those as well.
But one of the things you hit on was perfect. Does everybody know? Have you ever been a part of a tabletop exercise? Who's always there? Doug's going to be there for IT. MedVet's going to be here for this. The same people over and over again. Okay. So anybody ever watch? We Were Soldiers. We were soldiers once. while they're training, what does he do? When the helicopter's getting ready to land and everybody's getting ready to jump out, he hits that guy right there. He goes, "You're dead." Now what's going to happen? The next guy, he goes, "You're dead." So what happens is you got to train the people below you and have them ready to step up as well. Because what's going to happen is when that person is dead or not there, is that next person going to know what to do?
Yeah, we've seen that with some of the major hurricanes and weather events, especially with the cooperatives down in Florida. Their IT staff, their security staff, they can't be counted on because they're trying to figure out where their children are. They're trying to figure out if they have a home. And, that's important to kind of spread the responsibility and empower people to really save the day, or at least understand how they can save the day. Austin, have you been seeing anything interesting with playbooks evolving?
Yeah, from our perspective, just what we kind of alluded to earlier, right? You have to have the full spectrum for it to be like truly a valuable exercise at all. And we are like incorporating more things into our tabletop exercises than we have, previously. When it comes to, just the social engineering side of the house, right? You can't just do a tabletop exercise in a red team against a network, right? Where maybe you have a list of, IP addresses that you can look at and IP addresses you can't look at, right?
I love the pen test where it says, just test these, don't test those.
Right. It really needs to be full spectrum, right? Are you just saying that, this red team can scan this net block that you have and then, tell you what's vulnerable and what's not? That's a nice, idea, but it is a dinosaur.
Are you telling me bad guys don't read information security policies?
They do. And they also adopt and adapt to each other's TTPs, right? They stay current on that. But, does your red team actually include a social engineering component to it? Is that social engineering team going to have access to, the types of data sets that an APT group would have when it comes to breach data sets? Are they going to have the ability to do, open source intelligence? Are they going to have access to AI tools that they could use to, use your coworkers' pictures and information to socially engineer and masquerade as them so they can attempt to do, a social engineering attack that you would, want to expect and be prepared for from an APT group? It does really run the gambit, right, of all of the things. So my suggestion when it comes to tabletops and when it comes to, the red teaming ops, right? Look at what's on the menu of what you're getting, right? Make sure that it isn't, just an entree. Make sure you're getting your appetizers and, get your desserts as well.
All right. And one of the things, I'll touch on this just a smidge, but one of the things I've seen, particularly with my analysts, is that while AI can be scary, if in the hands of an attacker, it can actually be very effective in the hands of a defender. When you have to sort, analyze, and correlate massive amounts of logs, AI can do that very, very rapidly. So when in your security operations, with your security teams, even your IT teams, do not be shy about equipping them with AI tools that you vet, because you can actually create a huge force multiplier on that. I'm going to wrap this up with one last question. I know we only got about 2 minutes left, and this is kind of my kind of capstone question. And I'll start with Troy, and we'll go down the table. What are the most critical steps? If you had to know 3 things today, or do 3 things today, or 5 things this month, that utilities should take today, or critical asset owners should take today to prepare for potential cyber or physical induced grid disruption? If you had to give, like, if you're going to leave this conference and say there's 3 things you should know or you should do, what do you got?
I always believe in a layered approach. All right, redundancy. So I always come in and everything I do from the substations to my facilities is I go out from the outside in and make sure that we put the one layer, which, I'm talking, you get there, signage, cameras, lighting, foliage, up to the buildings. And I know it's a little off topic, probably what you're asking me, but that's the biggest thing for physical security to me is.
So slow down the attack.
Slow down
Give yourself
attack.
chances to
Keep on putting those roadblocks in.
Right.
And that's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 instead of 1, 2, 3s.
What do you got, Austin?
Yeah, I would just, tap onto what he was saying about layered approach. Like, you need to have that layered approach, but you also need to know what the layers are, right? And some of those layers might not be immediately clear to, a system or network administrator, right? You need more perspectives than just, who your individual incident response IT team is, right? So getting, more perspectives, to find out what missing layers there are, I think that's probably my recommendation.
And Jeff, what are some easy wins that you think that people could walk away from this session with?
Easy wins, I agree, layered approach. We mentioned this already, understand a full inventory of your vulnerable IT assets. Exercise your risk management plan, including incident response practices, and understanding what the organization of that IR team is, who's the incident response commander, and then also looking at reporting and information sharing, and actually having a standard operating procedure or some type of policy that defines what is your information sharing guidelines, and also including within that stakeholder engagement. And a lot of people are familiar with PMI, the program management program. It's really a good model for your risk management plan for cyber and cybersecurity. It includes a lot of those different components like stakeholder engagement, your budget, your work breakdown structure. Those are a couple examples that you could really fold into that risk management plan.
So I'll leave you with two. I know our time is short, but I want to leave you with two. One is make sure you have a good grasp, a really firm grasp on what your organization looks like externally, kind of outside in, and ask your team that. Ask your IT team, ask your security team. From an attacker's perspective, what do we look like? Are we minimal and durable, or do we have a lot of interesting nooks and crannies where they want to take a look at? And the second thing is kind of what I kind of started this conversation with today, was really, having the right people who just don't see, technology and defending technology as a 9 to 5, but really people are super passionate about it and care about, America's critical infrastructure and the importance of making sure that it's there for all of us to go home safely. With that, I think that's the end of our panel. 1 or 2 questions. Sure, go for it. Absolutely. Any questions from the audience?
And while we're waiting for that, if the slide deck, hopefully that'll be available for all of you. There's several links for information, including a recap of our Cyber Summit from January at the Gold Institute. But also there's a video of Iran. Sky News put it together. It's sort of rock band.
That was a cyber attack.
And it really highlights how Iran actually in a sophisticated manner maps out a critical infrastructure, and it shows you, what their government really is strategizing and planning for in terms of using cyber capabilities as a weapon.
Any hands up? There's one. Mitch.
Hey, Doug, how you doing? Good. Mine's more of a comment/question. Yesterday, I was working with my Rapid 17, which I give kudos to you guys. And some of the things that I was always concerned about is not what's trying to come in, but what's going out.
Right.
And when I did a search with my collector, I found a couple of instances where it was using an HTTPS port 443.
Yep.
And it was hitting a data center from Microsoft in China.
Yep.
So my concern is this.
Right.
Why are we as the United States, why are we using data centers in countries?
I think that's one of the, I guess the weaknesses of cloud providers. I think initially, yeah, you're right. And you're not going to have something screaming out on it's not going to be port 1337 calling out to the internet, right? It's going to be HTTPS 443, very common protocol, right out to Amazon, right out to Microsoft. And I think one of the questions we need to ask our cloud providers as critical asset owners is to say, hey, I don't want to communicate with your data centers in China, if at all possible. How do we shape our services to do that? And honestly, I know the federal government, they have their own cloud infrastructure. I do not think that a lot of the critical infrastructure asset owners, I don't believe yet that we have access to the same things. I'd like to get to the point where we could check a box and say, all US-based communication only, thank you very much, and we can call it a day. But I don't know if we're there yet. And I don't know if it's It's a malicious traffic. Love to talk to you about it. We'll take a look at it, but that's one of the things we have to get to is in a better state of things. I don't know if you have anything to add, Austin or Jeff or Troy.
Yeah, not a plug, but I know that Google, for example, does not have data centers based in China or Russia, which is a benefit if you do decide to go with them as a CSP. But when it comes to CSPs, right, you have to, they really need to be vetted very, very thoroughly by your organization. Like Snowflake, for example, they were a cloud service provider. They did get breached by initial access was via a Stealer log that threat actor purchased and all of that good stuff. Know where they have your things stored, and try to get as transparent information from them as you possibly can. It's critical. I know we can't really avoid using CSPs at this day and age, but we need them to be like incredibly transparent. And be proactive in getting all of the details and information that you need from a security perspective.
Any other questions?
Well, I think actually we are out of time. Perfect. So please, everyone, join me in thanking the panel for an excellent discussion.